toss and turn, I keep stressing my mind. I look for peace, but see I don't attain. What I need for peace to see.
Alright. Hello everyone.
Hi.
Hey. Hi Frank. Thank you for coming today. Today is going to be a talk called Children of the Sun. I know a couple of you are new, obviously a lot of people have been to a lot of the talks, but the theme for this topic is based on something that's going to happen tomorrow. Does anyone know what that is? Equinox, exactly.
Yeah,
exactly, yeah, equinox. So this is kind of inspired loosely by the equinox that's happening tomorrow, 19th of March, but normally 21st of March, that kind of time. But I decided to expand it out a little bit, and it's going to be a general discussion, a history of humanity's forgotten love for the sun. So my first question, I always like to kick off with a bit of questions, is what can you guys tell me is our relationship to the sun? What is the sun? What do we understand by the sun? And where is humanity's place in relation to the sun? Any ideas, guys?
Tanning.
Tanning, yeah, exactly. A good old sun tan. What else? Life. Yeah, everything needs a sun. Yeah, anything else? What else do we need the sun for? Or historically, what did we use the sun for? God, religion, light. Guidance.
In terms of navigation?
Yeah, navigation. What else? What other stuff do we use it for?
Energy.
What's another classic thing that we take for advantage every time we check our phones, every time we check a
Time.
watch? Time as well, okay? Humanity, throughout the history of time, has always been intimately linked with the sun. This mysterious giant star in the sky that you can fit 1 million Earths into, that has 98% mass of the entire solar system, this crazy giant that has the solar system named after itself, right? What's sun in Greek, Frank? Helios, exactly. Yeah. Helios, or the sun, which is Old English. Solar, soleil. But one of the bigger things the sun gave us, as humanity as a species, to our minds, was this concept of duality. What duality am I talking about? Day and night, exactly. The idea of a natural divide into our day, every single day. And for that reason, sun, or the sun, and presence of and absence of the sun, is the only natural and real marker for time that exists. It's the only real unit of time. The sun is either there or it isn't, and it changes throughout the day. So we have this idea of duality in mind, and by the way, think of stuff like the Bible and all that kind of stuff. You know, first God created light and dark. I mean, it's the most basic and fundamental divider. Before good and evil, beauty and ugly, any other dualities, light and dark is the primal one. What else do we know about the sun? What's this graphic showing us here? A pattern or behavior of the sun. Where does the sun rise? In the east, and it sets in the west. Predictably so, right? Throughout the world. So of course, it's not just, this isn't a modern phenomenon. From the beginning of time, humans knew that the sun would rise in the east and set in the west. And we have records from as far back as ancient Egypt, Mesopotamia. Here's from the Mayan calendar of people or astronomers whose sole profession would be to observe the sun. Like nowadays, you think of astronomy as all the kind of mapping of stars and things like that. But back in the day, one of the highest and most important sort of spiritual and intellectual leaders would be the person who would literally spend all day staring at the sun and the moon and trying to make sense of its kind of erratic yet predictable journey through the sky. And I'm just going to begin by talking a little bit about this place that Ariel and I went to in Mexico last year in the Yucatan Peninsula. The name of this place is called Edzna. And this is have you guys seen Mayan temples before? This kind of classic, very typical Mayan temple that we saw. So we were there and we were really struck by that. And actually when we arrived, we had this great guide, and Ariel asked him, why is it that every temple in Mesoamerica, where there's Aztec, Mayan, wherever you see it, they're always arranged with these kind of 4, what they call cardinal points. You always see something here, something there, and then 2 things on the side. She asked, why is it that they always have the same site? What kind of thought process does an ancient Mayan go through when they build a new city? And he actually explained it excellently to us. And I want to quickly do that to you guys as well, because it really did drop the penny for me when he explained it, and it's kind of made me really think a little bit ever since about how we look at the sun. So imagine you've got to put yourself into the primitive mind of a primitive astronomer, maybe 2,000 years ago, maybe 700 years ago. and you arrive at a new site, okay? This is the horizon line. What do you think as a builder of a temple, remember astronomers were the people that would build the temples, what would be the first thing that you would do? Can you think? Yeah. You'd build yourself like some spot.
What did you say?
A foundation. You build yourself a spot to observe. The first thing you would do in any like Mayan city, the oldest structure is normally like the priest or astronomer's tower, a block where you can observe. And then what do you think you would see looking back on it? Let's say this is the east and this is the west. What do you think you would observe here? What's this?
Sunrise?
Yeah, you see the sunrise in the east, and where would it set? In the west.
Sunset.
So the second thing you do as a Mayan or an Aztec or as any other kind of city planner, and this shows across all cultures, it's very fascinatingly kind of structured, is you build some kind of temple or marker to locate the spot of the rising and setting sun. Okay? Then obviously we know east-west. So this would be the north, let's say, and this would be the south. The next thing you would do is, as you're tracking the path of the sun across the sky, you would notice that at some point in the day, the sun reaches its highest point in the sky, right? And this is where you would build your biggest temple. Right there, to mark 3 points in the day: sunrise, sunrise, noon, sunset, or in our modern clocks, right? 6 a.m., midday, 6 p.m. Instantly they had this idea, and they would always build, if we look back here, a perfect spot to measure exactly where the highest point is, and then you'd have the two temples to track the sunset, and they start getting this idea of a passing day, right? And they would start measuring how many times the sun would go back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, and they would start measuring that, and they'd get an idea of what a day is, right? They get the idea of a day. And this is just a drawing that the guy showed us to show you that I'm not making all of this up. This is like how they would go about building their temples. Okay, obviously like places like Stonehenge, you did that in England, you see that in India, you see it in Asia, every continent across the world, in Africa, you'll see similar styles of planning and mapping. But now, once you know what a day is, you know that there's this amount of time in a day and then it's going to be night. What's the next thing you want to do? What's a smaller unit of the day? Hours. So the astronomer, the highest, most intellectual power of the time, would start tracking not just that, but they'd see what time does the sun pass at that point, what time does it pass at that point, and you start getting a sense over time of different hours in the day. And this is kind of exactly how we began building our 12-hour clock. This is why we have 12 hours in the day, because you would have the idea that the sun every day would appear at different points at different times according to your temples and how you marked it out. So it's essentially using the whole site like a giant sundial. So when you see something like this in Mexico or this in England, they're not just temples, they're actually basically sundials on a massive scale. And obviously with time, humans innovated and we learned that you don't necessarily need to build entire temples to do this. You can just, have a single point in the ground and you can start measuring and you can start getting this idea of a clock. And so you can see how very quickly, over every culture, they began to develop this idea of, okay, we can use the sun as our friend to make sense of the units of time. How do we tell the time? With the sun. Even today, whilst I was doing the research for this, I kept looking up at the sky from Zunya, and you can literally see if you look. So if you know that the east is here, west is there, because we always see the sunset there, then we know the north and south, and then you can literally follow the sky, so the sun will be around there. So what time is it now? It's probably 3:15, 3:20. It'll be just there. And it's going to go down, and you'll see predictably around 5:36 it will drop down. That's how we tell the time. This is an ancient Egyptian sundial, where this would be facing the rising sun. As it rises in the day, the shadow will grow longer and longer and longer and then fall, and you get this idea of these periods. This is an old Christian calendar, where you get the astrolabes from the Islamic world as well, much more sophisticated now, but the point is it's all doing the same thing. But then it's not enough to know what a day is, it's not enough to know what an hour is. What's a bigger thing that we need to know?
Year.
Yeah, exactly. And so what this priest would realize as well is that the sun doesn't just go like this throughout the year. It also goes like this, up and down throughout the year. And there will be some points in the year where the passage of the sun is short. There will be some points where it's less short. There will be some points where the passage of the sun is long. And it will start to understand that the sun changes position throughout the year in its height. And do you know what we call this point, which is the low, where we find the lowest sun? Exactly. This is what we call the winter solstice.
I didn't say it, she did.
Oh, exactly. Sorry. Winter solstice. And what would you call the highest or longest day in the year? The summer solstice. So you get this, they get this idea of, okay, there's one day a year, every year, where the sun is at its highest point and it never gets beyond that. And there's one point where it's at the lowest point. Again, the temples would be tracking that. So there will be one point where it never gets higher than that point, one point where it never gets lower. And so we can see here, this is how the sun changes course over the year. And if you want after this, we can go into the science of that. But for the time being, let's think of it from the position of ancestral man. And as we're getting that, there are 2 points in the year. Imagine the sun is always going from the midpoint. There are 2 points. As it's getting summer, what happens to how many hours of sunlight do we get relative to darkness? Long days, short nights, yeah? And then when it's doing that, we get short days, long nights. But as it goes from the shortest day to the longest day, there are 2 times up and down where it have an exactly equal time, or very close to exactly equal. 12 hours of sunlight, 12 hours of darkness. And that is what we call the equinox, which is Latin for equal night. So night and day are equal. So that's what the equinox means. And the solstice is Latin for sol stere, which means the sun in the same place, because the sun hovers over noon. So the sundials would stay longer without a shadow because the sun is at its highest or lowest point. So now we get an idea of what a solstice is. We get one summer solstice, one winter solstice, and then 2 equinoxes in between. Now these give us the seasons, right? The summer solstice, summer, winter, winter, and then we've got the vernal equinox, which is the one today, coming up tomorrow, which brings in spring, and then the autumnal equinox, which brings in autumn. So this is how we began to build this conception of time. And you can see here, this is just an illustration of like Stonehenge and how these structures would map a winter solstice. You can imagine a druid or whoever it was that was in those times looking through there and saying, it's never going to get lower than that point, or it's never going to get higher than that point. This is the highest day of the year, this is the solstice, this is the winter solstice. So before we understood really years and anything like that, we knew for a fact, humans knew that there would be a longest day, a shortest day, 2 middle days to make the whole year, and that's a solar cycle. People like the Mayans got so amazingly good at tracking this over years that they had a 365-day calendar. They knew exactly how many days of the year there were. They built their temples, which we'll see in a bit, to perfectly replicate what we even today consider like facts. They knew that well, in the case of Mayans, less than 1,000, but we don't know exactly how long that accuracy of astronomy was present. This is an equinox. And so here you can see the winter solstice, short days, summer solstice, long days, equinox, middle days. Okay, now this is where I want to hear from Isabel, because obviously no cultures are going to miss a chance to have an amazing party, right? So as soon as they got a sense of what these special days are, cultures around the world obviously have these huge and crazy celebrations everywhere. So the most famous one for summer solstice is the Midsommerstag, which we're going to hear about. But from my very quick foray into it, I know that it's not quite as crazy as this film Midsummer that came out I think a few years ago. But I do know that it's a crazy festival where there's maypoles and dancing and celebration of fertility and eating herring and doing this crazy frog dance, which Isabel's going to kindly demonstrate for us in a little bit. Actually, can you do it now quickly?
I can do it.
How does this go?
There is, we sing a song that essentially is called like Little Frogs, and you essentially just pretend to be a frog. So we go around the what is
Where
called
is that?
Maypole.
What?
Maypole?
maybe.
I mean, it's not probably not, but like something like that pole.
Yeah. The midsummer pole, essentially. Like you see, it's a phallus symbol actually. So the odd one Danny connected to like fertility, but we have this tradition of during this day, like everything is about gathering around family or friends, having a party, eating food, and just celebrating the beginning or like kind of like the middle of the summer. So I think this holiday is more holy than, or like it's sacred, sacred than any other holiday in Sweden. Everyone is out, everyone is taking time, going to their archipelago, summer house, or in the somewhere on the countryside to just celebrate and be in nature. And every time this midsummer pole is built by birch branches, and sometimes it has flowers, and it's usually done like a tradition that was very present in like the villages and like the small towns. Like it would be, the community would kind of like be gathering with this. So like you have maybe 50 to 100 people more that are gathering and just playing. So everyone is building a circle around the pole, and then someone you see here with the accordion is playing live music, and everyone is singing, and most of the people know all of these songs. So there's one called Little Frogs, so it's called Små grodorna in Swedish, so it goes små grodorna är lustiga att se. Små grodorna är lustiga att se. I öron, svansar hava det. I öron, svansar hava det. And then like everyone is just walking around singing this. Essentially the lyrics are little frogs, they are funny to watch or to see. They don't have ears, and they don't have tail. And then everyone is going down on like squatting, and then say go and everyone is doing this in a circle. Old, young, kid, adult, everyone is doing it.
I love that.
Wild.
Yeah.
Love it. Well, there you go. I mean, they do midsummer. Swedes do midsummer better than anyone, I think. But cultures everywhere in the world have it. Like obviously, from being England, Midsummer Night's Dream is Shakespeare's one of his most famous plays. That was all based on pagan views of midsummer, similar themes: fertility, renewal, spring arrival, party, drunkenness. The kind of idea of again, kind of like the carnival that I spoke about last week. In Stonehenge, they always do these kind of crazy sort of druidy parties where people come and have a bit of a crazy time. And I found this in Greece, Frank. Klidonas.
I've never heard of that.
You've never heard of it?
What do they do?
I read it. Klidonas. I don't know where in Greece it's celebrated, but apparently it's a festival in midsummer where virginal women, young women, give in their most treasured possessions and put it into a little basin under a fig tree, and then they sleep and they're supposed to dream about their future husbands who they'll then meet.
What?
People do it everywhere in the world. I don't know. Maybe they do, maybe they don't in Greece. But the point is that people everywhere have these crazy traditions around this time. Some of them nice, as we've seen, lovely little frog dance, and some of them not so nice, like in one part of China where they have the Yulin lychee and dog meat festival, which happened in 2009 and was a serious problem. I think 10,000 dogs would get eaten and killed and stuff like that. Luckily in 2020, apparently in the whole wake of COVID and stuff, that got completely banned. The dogs are officially banned to prepare them in this way. But the idea is that there are all these nutty festivals. Same in Japan, there's a thing called Toji, where, do you know this? There's a little capybara. And in Toji, Japanese in some parts throw these fruits, I think yuzu. They throw them into the hot water and it like ferments them, is meant to purify your spirit. But apparently capybaras also really like it, so it's turned into a tradition where they let these things bathe and throw fruits into water. Then you've got this wild one, Santo Tomas in Guatemala, which is a kind of Christian and indigenous festival where these guys will dress up as figures and climb poles of up to like 50, 60 meters and bungee jump off them.
What?
That happens in Guatemala. Then you've got this Burning Clocks Festival in Brighton in England where people dress up and they make these clocks out of paper and they impart their wishes into the clocks and burn them to show like a change and renewal and changing of the clocks and time. And the point is that all of these festivals are wild and kind of crazy and super different, but all of them recognize these fundamental themes, which are stuff like fertility, the beginning of spring, the beginning of harvest, stuff like that, like the harvest moon, which comes in one of the equinoxes, which is the reason why in China you eat moon cakes, which is part of that ritual of celebrating these harvest traditions. And even cooler, we spoke earlier, was this building Chichen, which is so beautifully calibrated and aligned to the equinox that every year, at exactly when the equinoxes are, the sun beams down on the pyramid to cast a shadow of a writhing serpent, the Kukulkan serpent, that literally crawls down in real time to the base of this pyramid where there is a giant carved head of a snake, of Kukulkan. So this is like one of the most, and to this day, believed to be one of the most insane feats of man working with sun. And this is in Chichen Itzá, one of the wonders of the world, quite near Tulum, in like kind of in the Yucatan Peninsula. And here you see the sun starts riding down, and it lands perfectly into the heads of the snakes. And you can imagine in the time this would be an insane celebration with blowing on conch shells, everyone going mental and thinking that the feathered serpent, which is their highest god, had literally landed to the temple. So I would argue that this, for me at least, in my research, is the epitome of how profoundly connected human beings can be with the sun.
Can you move it so I can't see where it went?
How profoundly human beings connect with the sun. And people come here all the time and cry when they see it because it's beautiful. But the point I want to make today, which is kind of, I always like to take the past into the modern, is somewhere along the line, our relationship and connection with the sun obviously became fundamentally broken. And that's mainly due to two inventions. Anyone have any idea what two inventions broke this millennia long, 2 millennia, 5 millennia long relationship with the sun? Huh? Clock? Yeah, yes.
Light bulb.
And the light bulb, exactly. The pendulum clock. Yeah, very impressive. Bloody hell, guys. Sharp. The pendulum clock and the electric light bulb fundamentally changed humanity's relationship with the sun. Because in the 1600s, when the pendulum clock was invented, we no longer relied on the sun to tell the time. We didn't need shadows or sundials. And you can see that here. We have this early idea of the pendulum clock, a ticking clock. Doesn't need sun. It's not a sun-guided natural world time. It's a time based on meter and based on frequency of a pendulum. And then that developed obviously into mechanical clocks and became more complex, into digital clocks, and eventually into the iPhone and the way we relate to time today. All of us, almost without fail. And then the other one, of course, is the light bulb. How when Thomas Edison in 1879 invented the light bulb, changed everything. That was an internet or industrial revolution level of change, an absolute paradigm shift. Mainly because of what reason? What beforehand, when the sun would set, what would happen to us mentally and in terms of our day?
We couldn't see.
Yeah, we literally couldn't see. We maybe had fire, maybe we had some candles, maybe we had things, but these things are quite expensive, quite impractical. But when the sun set, the day was kind of done as human beings. And we've been hardwired this way throughout time. The sun finishes and then it's time to start winding down. But obviously with the electric light bulb, that was the minute that we turned our back on the sun. And we said, you know what, you don't really determine our time anymore. We do.
And the night shift started.
Yeah, and then the nightlight started, and then we all went clubbing to Berlin. But yeah, this is the idea. The idea is that the light started going, streets started to become lighter, nightlife started to emerge, people could do things indoors, and you could explore caves, all the kind of places that would used to be sort of the night became part of the living day. And what I think happened here is that it fundamentally meant that we didn't need the sun anymore in the way we used to. Of course, we still needed the sun for fertility, for crops and things like that, but we didn't need the sun in terms of structuring our existence in the world, the way we think about our time and the way we think about our lives. And you can see here how, like, basically cities would become 24-hour daytimes. Las Vegas, which is the brightest place in the world at night. I mean, it's basically daytime at night. And so the question today that I want to lead into and kind of, open up the discussion is, what did we lose? Obviously, we gained some amazing things by having accurate pendulum clocks and timekeeping devices. Obviously, we gained so much having electricity and everything that's allowed us to do in our lives. And if we were to go back to the Dark Ages, where we were at the mercy of the sun, things would be very different, and all the technologies and everything would be completely different. In fact, you can't even conceive of a modern city without electricity. It's impossible. It's so married into what we know. But my question is, what did we lose? Connection with nature and ourselves. Yeah. Anything else?
Health.
Health. Yeah. As a result.
I'm reading a book now about the circadian rhythms and how. I'm reading a book now about the circadian rhythms and how we're supposed to go to sleep when the sun goes to sleep. Goes down.
Hundreds of thousands of years, our human brains have been, well, Homo sapien brains, human brain, have been hardwired, like every other animal, to follow the rhythms of day and night. The duality of day and night that we started to is how we are built. And you see this with the circadian rhythms, and we're not going to go into it in too much detail, but it'll be fascinating to hear after the talk about it. But the circadian rhythm basically says that when we first see light and we stop seeing light, hormonal, immune system, and brain chemistry changes. You know, when we first see light, cortisol comes in, we take on the day, we have a shot of adrenaline, like literally in our brains, a coffee shot, and we're ready to start. We reach peak alertness, testosterone levels elevated, we become a bit more alert, more aggressive, we start getting stronger, we start, using and getting ready for the day. And then when the night comes, melatonin starts kicking in, we start to get sleepy, we start to get tired, we start to get less alert, we start to get less kind of efficient at doing certain tasks, and we begin to shut down for our good restorative sleep, and so the cycle begins again. And so by turning away from the natural clock, we've kind of fucked our own internal clocks as well.
Isn't it also like our perception of time is much more granular, but it's very, like you said, it's completely disconnected to nature. We're only relying on this to be,
which isn't even a natural thing.
Yeah, it's super artificial. Sorry, what? No, what did you say?
The blue light from this device also affect completely or like sleeping.
Exactly, and so the night shift begins, right? So the idea of a night shift, I'm going to do an all-nighter tonight, or I'm going to work late in the office, or all this kind of stuff. This kicks in because we changed our relationship to time. And there are some studies which say, people who do night shifts as opposed to day shift have a 30% greater chance of getting cancers, and the health risks are incredibly well researched and significant, that this kind of new artificial rhythm that we work and live by is actually detrimental to our health. And it doesn't take anyone much to just scratch the surface and understand that clearly it's not natural, right? And a second, maybe like slightly less obvious thing that we've lost, which is a really important one, is that we've lost the night sky.
Yeah, I thought about it though.
Yeah.
With like all the light pollution, the fact that we can't see the stars anymore, and that was such a huge importance before, like watching the stars, star signs and everything, astrology.
Yeah.
No, not astrology. Yeah?
Astronomy. And doing that
sorry,
kind of stuff.
astronomy.
Yeah. And that's 86% of the world's population lived under light polluted skies, and it's so bad nowadays that it's actually ruining our astrology and astronomy within places, because they're having to fight to keep it clear. It's almost like we're muddying the camera lens in which we look to, which we access the stars by. Like our own perceptions are being fogged by the increased light pollution, often pointless light pollution, but also just little things like losing that connection with how small we are in the world, losing the sight to be able to see, a Milky Way or something, and being able to understand our human experience, our Earth, as one tiny speck in this thing. Losing that mirror that gives us maybe a bit of humility, maybe perspective, just kind of becoming increasingly blind to the perspective of our place in the world. Yeah. Like I say, 1/3 of the population have and never will see the Milky Way.
Wow.
Most people think it's just a chocolate bar.
Yeah.
It's so kind of crucial, this problem of light pollution, that they have a scale to measure it, which is called the Bortal scale, which looks at like what a dark sky should look like, and scales it, levels it from a 1 being the best and a 9 being the kind of 1 or 2 stars that might be a satellite, we don't really know. This is starting to become a problem, and obviously the fascinating thing about the night sky and light pollution, unlike any other pollution like water contamination or carbon footprint. This is something that we could stop overnight. The second you turn off all the lights, problem would be solved, but it's something that we continue to sort of exercise in this kind of often pointless contamination of our sky. And I think the most thing is that we've just forgotten, by losing our relationship with the sun and losing our connection with the sun, I would argue that one of the most important things that we've lost our connection with darkness. We've lost our connection with the black night, shadow, the dark night that we have. And I think for me that's like a really interesting kind of flip on its head, is that by turning our backs to the sun, we also turn our backs to the darkness, and we lost our understanding of that. And at the moment I'm reading this book called In Praise of Shadows by Tanizaki. Have any of you guys heard of this book? It's amazing, so I'd highly, it's very short, it's a short essay, but it's called In Praise of Shadows because it's about a Japanese, I'm not sure if he is an architect, he's a Japanese writer who obsesses with everything that is Japanese, especially architecture and art and things like that. And he talks about how throughout all of traditional Japanese life, shadows played an integral part to the experience of being in your own house, added so much beauty and complexity to spaces that the modern, what he calls the Western man's floodlight, has just eliminated. And he uses examples ranging from these beautiful buildings that you see to even like the toilet. The fact that in certain Japanese you'd have like dark lacquer wood, like wooden flooring and stuff that would not emit very much light. So you'd have this idea of an unknown kind of secret aspect to it. Whereas now if you go to a toilet or a hospital or whatever, it's bright light, everything can be seen. It's meant to be more sanitary. But he's saying actually we've kind of lost our touch with what is beautiful, with what is mysterious. And the same goes with people, with plays, with theatre, with film, with everything. We live in an overlit world. And obviously he was writing this, kind of around the 60s or something. He died in the 60s. I'm not sure exactly when he wrote the book. But I do wonder what he'd make of Tokyo today. He'd probably, have an absolute heart attack seeing how the traditional values and aesthetics of Japan, which was so married to shadow due to the absence of electricity and light, has now become this kind of, neon porn that we see today. He left this really beautiful quotation, which is, were it not for shadows, there would be no beauty. So his obsession with shadows extends so much that he doesn't believe that something can be beautiful if we don't see the nuances of shadow. And I've been thinking about that quotation a bit in the preparation for this talk, and trying to think about it with Zunya and with our experience here in a relatively remote place where you have access to the elements, and in Costa Rica. And I've thought that obviously we can enjoy the beautiful sunrises and the kind of nice hazy glow of a sunrise. We can enjoy the kind of full force of the heat that we all experience right now as we're indoors taking a bit of shade. And we can of course experience the beautiful sunsets that are a bit of a trademark here. But one of the things I think is most underrated about the experience that we have here, and I've certainly noticed, and I'll be interested to hear what you guys say, is actually how much we now experience the darkness more than you would maybe in your city lives. The idea that we kind of, when the sun sets here at 6 o'clock, the day does kind of start to wind down. Like we have minimal light, and then we get back into the darkness. And it's amazing how quickly I found that like my body clock kind of resyncs to that. When we were in Mexico City or in New York or in London, where I come from, I would sometimes stay up until 11:30, 12, 1. Like I'm not exactly a night owl, but it would be standard to go to bed at like 11:30, 12. Whereas here, about 7 o'clock, I'm starting to get really tired. I'm starting to get sleepy. I could go to sleep at 8. Went to sleep yesterday at 9. Never do that in the city. And wake up at 5, 5:30 with a rise. And so my final question is, do we still have a relationship with the sun? And if not, what do we think we've lost, and what can we do to get it back? Thank you very much, guys. Nice.